Welcome back to the Voyager Podcast. I am so thrilled to be here with our Chief Human Exploration Officer, Tim Kopra. Sir, Army Colonel retired. We're going to talk so much about your career and ultimately going to space. So I really am excited to have you here on our show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, all right. So you get selected for NASA, and now we know that is additional amazing training, but what was it like getting selected for your first mission?
So amazing, but it was a very long process. Selected in 2000. The first couple of years is essentially basic training for astronauts. You're learning at the time about the space shuttle, the brand new space station that we were building, how to do the spacewalks. They call it extravehicular activity, EVAs, how to use the robotic arm on board, initially for assembling the space station and then for maintenance and other activities on station. So that first 2 years is pretty jam-packed. And then I went with one of my classmates. He had a speaking engagement in Atlanta, and I was waiting for him to complete. I was just getting some T-38 time. And I'm watching the TV, and we had the Columbia disaster over the state of Texas. And so we had a very quiet ride coming home. Like, first off, like the loss of our friends, the loss of a national capability. And like personally, what does that mean for us? Like, would you go find another job? What's going to happen to the entire program? NASA did a great job of getting through that really, really hard time. But it meant that our class didn't fly for 9 years. It was a really long time. And my assignment was, it wasn't like the second flight where it was very definitive, train 2.5 years, fly in space. I was selected as both a combined space shuttle and space station crew member. And we were still learning. First off, we didn't know when we were going to return to flight after Columbia. And also, we didn't fully have the training plan nailed flat where we knew it would be a certain amount of time. Now we do. It's a learning process. So it was a 4.5-year training cycle as we waited for Columbia to come back on board, being assigned to a space shuttle flight that actually came later, learning the basic station stuff. So it was kind of a slow burn, frankly. And, didn't fly until 2009. Our whole class waited 9 years to fly, which is a long time. You have a lot of people that have a lot of potential and are energetic and excited and very skilled. And, you definitely have to learn patience and what your role is. And the role of an astronaut really is three things. It's flying in space is the thing that's so visible, but your primary job really is supporting flight and training for the flight. So it's really the pinnacle event when you get to fly, but it was a long time. But then once I got to station, I was frankly pretty tired of training and had been a long wait. And it was an interesting mission because we did an assembly mission, brought up the Japanese exposed facility, one of the big chunks of space station. It took 3 robotic arms, 2 spacewalks, of course, all the ground testing to make sure the design and build matched up. And so I was tired. And we also had a very jam-packed mission. I mean, everything was just down to 5-minute increments to get things done for a really complex mission. And so we launched on flight day 1. We orbited the Earth on flight day 2 and made our orbit higher. Flight day 3, we docked. I went to sleep in the airlock that night. In the morning of flight day 4, after barely getting used to space, I'm opening the hatch, and looking down at the planet going past it 5 miles a second. But massive pinnacle event. And I remember telling my wife, because we have these really great capabilities on ISS, it's an internet protocol telephone. So I called my wife pretty much every day I was in space. I remember telling her that the last 4 days had made the previous 4 years completely worth it.
Incredible. And of course, Dylan's talked about just the life-changing impact of the overview effect. And I know that you've been asked this question 100 times, but for those that have not heard your take on what it is like to escape our atmosphere, and take a look at our beautiful planet. I mean, what impact did that leave on you?
Well, I'll preface it by saying that the overview effect that anybody in low Earth orbit cannot compare to what my 4 colleagues saw when they went to the moon. Like when I listen to them, like we have some of that, but they got it in full bore. And you can hear it in their voice. I know that their experience is different than mine, but anybody that's able to see our beautiful planet from a distance, it does have an impact in a few different ways. But I remember going to the window in the Japanese lab and looking outside, you know, kind of like that, where you're seeing the planet. It's like, I know where I am. And intellectually, all this makes sense, but like you're still processing. It is not normal. But then after a while, especially if you're a long duration space flyer and you've been there, you know, second mission was 6 months, it becomes completely normal, which is odd in itself. But in terms of impact, you know, a few things. You go around the planet every 90 minutes. And as you go around the planet is also rotating. So you're always seeing a new spot. Half the time it's light and half the time it's dark. And when it's dark out, you see the planets like nobody's business. I mean, it's like being at Big Bend in Texas without light pollution, but then on steroids, and you're not connected. I remember sitting on my back porch when I came home, and it was a different feeling versus being in space looking at our universe. But when it's light out, your pupils get really small, so they don't let light in. You don't see stars. You just see black. And you know, intellectually, it goes forever. And I mean, it still gives me chills thinking about, like, we have Earth, and then you have the abyss. And it goes forever. So that's probably one of the most startling things. You see this really thin atmosphere that's protecting our planet, and then you have the abyss. But then at nighttime in particular, I became really interested in taking photographs of cities at night. You see these really intricate lighting, these balls of light, and these little tentacles that connect to the other cities, and it's evidence of how, you know, life is on our planet, and it's all interconnected. I think that those are the biggest effects. And I mean, it sticks with you in a really visceral way.
As we're sitting here with live feeds from the ISS, where you spent a little time there, and you know, really wanted to hop in. You know, we're talking a lot of origin stories, which is great. But you know, I know that you began your career in the military starting at one of our service academies at West Point. So what brought you to West Point? Because I tell you, and I'm going to tell a quick story. I was 17. I joined the Air Force. I graduate basic training. I show up at Lowry Air Force Base, so totally dating myself. And I was in the BX, and I see these young folks about my age with these really cool uniforms with, like, you know, squiggly epaulets on their shoulders. And I was like, wow, what are those guys? And my buddy's like, oh, they're Academy cadets. I'm like, what's the Academy? Right. So, and then, you know, coming to learn, you know, after I commissioned, I would have loved to go to the Air Force Academy, but you realize for young folks, I mean, and I hold our Academy graduates and cadets in such high regard, because you really have to have your stuff together at a young age to make sure that you have all of the credentials to even be able to apply, let alone get accepted. So can you talk to us your journey about what it was like, especially for young folks that are watching this or listening to this podcast? What does it take to become a cadet?
You know, it is an arduous process, but I don't think I really became interested in it until I was really a sophomore or junior in high school. I didn't really know about it either. It was just a flyer in the mail. It's like, this looks amazing. One, they would pay for college. As a 16, 17-year-old, that was exciting. But also what I think appealed to me was the discipline, the rigor, the reputation that the school had. But I think it also ties back to when I was a little kid. You know, you're watching cartoons like way back in the day. The morning would start out with jets flying over, and it was all about the United States. And my father, he was a college professor at University of Texas. He spent a career doing that. But before that, he flew the hump in Burma during World War II, and then he was a reserve officer. And so we spent some time on military bases. And, you know, it's funny how things work out in your life, these little pieces that influence you and make you excited. But it became clear to me once I got to West Point that it was the right fit. And the process is you have to go through your congressman or your senator to get a nomination, and you go through this whole process. And as I went through that process, I became more and more excited. And it was kind of a quantitative process as well, like the things that they wanted to see, because what the academies need in general is a combination of academics, physical rigor, because it's a physical job, and leadership. And so as soon as I became excited about the opportunity, I really focused on trying to really build that capability, and then went to West Point 4 years later, second lieutenant, United States Army.
How cool. Well, I tell you, my hope and goal for this podcast is somebody who's interested in space comes across this podcast, listens to you, and says, you know what, maybe I should think about applying to West Point or the Air Force Academy. So again, you mentioned there are these touch points in all of our lives that, you know, have trajectory shaping, you know, effect.
Absolutely.
And so I really appreciate you being here again with us to talk about it. So, West Point. I don't know a lot of West Point grads. I know a couple of guys that graduated West Point, but they became Air Force officers because that's my background.
Yeah.
But so, talk to me about the experience. Again, being an Air Force guy, I know more about the Air Force Academy than West Point. But I mean, amazing history. What is a week like in the life of a cadet there?
It is jam-packed. I remember my first semester, I had 21.5 hours. And on top of that, you have intramurals or a sport that you play. You have parades. And, when you're 18 years old, you're learning how to march on the parade field. You kind of scratch your head while you're doing that. But it's really about working together with a team and time management. I think I learned time management really well there. Maybe too well. You're going to class and you're watching the second hand hit the 12 because you don't want to be early because you're always using that time for something else. But it's a full-on experience when it comes to the rigor of the academics, having to work closely with your classmates. And I think, one of the reasons that, my friends, I have lots of friends that are former Academy graduates, West Point graduates, is because we have that common bond. And we know each other from the time we were 18 years old, this really formative period where we're learning how to play well with others, how to be a good team player. Some people were not good team players. You remember those people too. And then, the military discipline and understanding what it means to serve our nation in the capacity of an Army officer. So all that comes together. And, my son is also a West Point grad, and it was really amazing to watch him mature over those 4 years. He was an Eagle Scout and, he was a wrestler. He was very athletically fit, but watching him and his buddies just grow through that experience was really heartwarming, and it reminded me of my own experience.
Well, and I tell you something that, we have chatted about and reflected on, but, even in society right now, the notion of instead of being an individual and having, you being celebrated as an individual, I think some of the things that we take away is, being part of something that's larger than yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think, hopefully, again, we're bringing that back with this new resurgence of exploration, which I know we're going to really dive deeply into that. But I didn't ask you, when did you know that you wanted to be an astronaut? Was this something that, by the time you could walk, or you were 5, or what was the catalyst for like you then redirecting your focus in having astronaut wings as a goal?
I really didn't think about wanting to be an astronaut until I was about 6. When I was 6 years old, we were landing men on the moon. I think every 6-year-old wanted to be an astronaut. It was an amazing experience for our country and a shot in the arm for all youth. I think it's one of the reasons that we have this technology capability in the United States, not just the industries that were birthed out of that, but also the excitement of, it's really hard to be an engineer and to study math and science and engineering, but having something that really motivates you, I think, is super important. But it's kind of a ridiculous goal. I mean, the selection process is quite onerous. But when I was a plebe at West Point, which is the very bottom of the totem pole, and you know that you're at the bottom because they make sure that you know, and I was sitting at the table in our mess hall that has all 4,000 cadets, and the center of the mess hall has this big platform that people speak from, and we had 3 former Apollo astronauts that were West Point graduates come and speak to us, and I thought, they were sitting in my seat 3 decades ago. And if I just really focus hard now, like at least it's a possibility. And that was, to me, the catalyst that made me realize that it was a feasible goal.
For sure. And so you graduate West Point and you go through flight school to become an Apache pilot. So I'm sure, based on that initial experience, that you've got a couple of nuggets that came out of your flight training in combat experience as well.
Yeah, for sure. The way the Army has a career path, it's pretty regimented. You start out as a lieutenant, you're a platoon leader, and then you're a staff officer. And the first aircraft I flew was these little scout aircraft called OH-58s, not the new version, but the old version. But, the thing that I think that's really great about the Army experience that's relatively unique, you're 22, 23 years old as a platoon leader, and now you're responsible for people that are 10, 15 years older than you that are working under your command. And so it's a really interesting dynamic of you have the leadership responsibility, but you must be able to trust people and identify talent and build rapport with people. So it's a unique way to learn leadership because you have to be able to have a level of humility, because you're not going to be the smartest guy. You're not going to be the most experienced by far, but how do you be a leader and advance? And then the next big opportunity from a leadership perspective was being a company commander for an Apache company. Same thing there, more experience, aviators and maintainers, but bringing that team together to execute a mission was really a great experience for me.
Yeah, incredible. And of course, ultimately at the end of the day, being mission focused, right? And then
100%.
And then, taking the fight to the enemy if need be on behalf of our nation. So appreciate your service and dedication there. And I'm sure it wasn't all, gumdrops and rainbows as you're going through this scenario and telling your leadership, hey, I want to now depart the fix and go become a NASA astronaut. So, and I'm sure you've had supportive leadership, but even amongst the bros, right? Your peers are like, who's this guy who's going to go from, flying Apaches to go into space? I mean, what was that journey like?
That was a bit of a gauntlet, to be quite frank, because the Army is a large bureaucracy and it has a mission. And as a consequence, it's relatively parochial about how you do things. And so as a lieutenant and then a captain, my goal was to see if I could become an astronaut. And I knew from my contemporaries, or actually my predecessors, the folks who have been Army astronauts, which is pretty rare. There's only been about 20 or so at the time, maybe a dozen. And I looked at what their path was, and their path was to become, to get an engineering degree, become an experimental test pilot, because those are great skills that directly apply to being an astronaut. And the path was to join the Acquisition Corps, which is a brand new organization in the Army, because that was the way I could go to grad school. So I was very fortunate. I went to Georgia Tech for aerospace engineering and then applied to Navy Test Pilot School. So you've deviated from the real Army to go into Acquisition Corps. And then to become a test pilot, now you're this segment of Acquisition Corps that's not really highly regarded because you're different. And then I got invited to work at NASA for a couple of years for a reason that I'll explain. So now I've departed the test pilot community. So now I'm in this little niche of maybe I could become an astronaut or maybe not. And the reason the Army did this was that the Air Force and the Navy always had a leg up. They were the front seat of the space shuttle because you had to have high performance jet time in order to be a space shuttle commander or pilot, whereas I was competing to be a mission specialist. So the Army had this program where they would invite 2 to 4 Army officers just to work at Johnson Space Center for a period of time, kind of like a long interview process. So you're really rolling the dice, because if that doesn't work out, then hopefully you can have a successful career if you stay in, but you become this point design that isn't exactly applicable to the rest of the different career paths in the Army. And I was just super fortunate to get selected back in 2000.
Wow. And now, during that time, did you get an opportunity to fly in the T-38 during that assignment?
No. Well, during those couple of years when I was just working as an engineer at NASA, I still maintained currency in the Apache a little bit. So because there was an Apache unit that was at Ellington Field, which is nearby. In fact, it's where the T-38s are. But then once you become an astronaut, the T-38s are important because they call it spaceflight readiness training. It's an example where you're in a high stakes environment. You have to be able to communicate effectively under those circumstances. You have to have eye-hand coordination. You need to be able to communicate the crew resource management with the other pilot on board. And so it's a great training environment. That's really where I got the T-38 time.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got a common friend from your space flight class, and I got to fly in a jet with him, and he hadn't flown since he retired in a couple of years. And, he was like, hey, the first time we fly, I'm just going to, just hang out. And it was like 10 seconds. He's like 40, 60, 80, rotate. I mean, he was just back in it. And it was really a testament to the training and the rigor that you all go through as astronauts. So,
yeah, it's important. And he's a good example of how that training is important, because flying in space is also a very disciplined activity, and you have to think on your feet. You need to be well trained, and there's very little room for mistakes.
Right, and that is something. Although we love simulation, that sometimes, and you said it before, we've said it a bunch. Especially when we're training with the private space crews, commercial space crews, of like, why are you out flying jets? Because you have to be in a high consequence environment. right? And you have to rely on each other and know and build the confidence that, you've been either in, fingertip formation coming through the weather just to get home and land safely, backing each other up if there's emergency, checklist use, crew resource management, all of those things. I mean, it's just such a cool byproduct out of doing an activity that, let's face it, is just really fun, right?
Oh yeah, at the end of the day, it is fun. Yeah.
Well, I've had the pleasure and honor of talking to a few astronauts that have shared their experiences. So I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. But you all seem to have the same notion of, this wasn't just something that I experienced. I have almost a duty to share this experience with everybody else, through your talks and all of that. So again, thank you for doing that, because, I think we just hit just over 700 people being
amazing,
in space.
Right?
So
more is better.
Yeah, more is better, which is great. So that's a great segue into talking about what you're doing today, right? After amazing, 220,
244.
244.
But who's counting? Apparently I am.
Yeah. Well, you should count. It's an incredible accomplishment. 244 days off of the planet. Not many people can say, obviously, that they did it, but to do it for, nearly a year is pretty incredible. But now, in your role here, we get to brag that we're sitting here in mission control because we have our duties and responsibilities with our Bishop airlock and doing mission management on the ISS, and we have experiments that we oversee and get to see our friends. We were watching Jessica fly by before and do an experiment, but just to be part of that now on the other side, on the commercial side. You've been a professional astronaut. Obviously, we talked about the rigor that it takes to get selected and do that. And now you just said it, more is better. That's what we're endeavoring to do by democratizing space and opening space. What is your perspective on, again, we can talk specifically what we're doing at Starlab here to open this concept of, getting more people to see the overview effect and opening the commercial market?
For sure. There's a lot of dimensions that we could cover here, but, broadly, what the ISS has done over the past 25 years of a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit has been so fundamental on several different levels. Not to underrate the geopolitical aspect and the international relations that it fosters, which is very important. It's a platform by which it forces people to work together in a mission. When you work together on a mission, as you know, it creates bonds that are very unique. In fact, I think that the reason that, we obviously have challenges with our relationship with Russia, but we've carved that out in space. We still work together. And I think the reason that we've progressed with that is for two people. It was Alexei Leonov and Jim Stafford, who became best friends on Apollo-Soyuz, godfathers of each other's kids. That graduated from Apollo-Soyuz into the Shuttle Mir program. We worked with the Russians. We had American crew members on board the Russian space station and then the International Space Station. I spent, all told, years in Russia training. So it's one place where we still have maintained a really strong working relationship because we have a common bond and a common mission, and it comes down to people. But the other aspect is this 25 years of long duration spaceflight. I've been so impressed of the development since I last flew. It's hard to believe, but it's been a decade since I last flew. And in that time frame, it kind of reminds me of my venture experience where, the startups always pitch you about the knee in the curve and everything starts to take off, but we're hitting that knee in the curve. And we have these amazing proof points of commercialization, which is a great transition because spaceflight is hard, spaceflight is expensive, and having a public-private partnership with NASA to take advantage of that knee in the curve and take it to the next level of commercialization, I think is super exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we really need to leverage the experience that has been grown through folks like you and then take that into the private sector, right? To unlock, the biopharma perspective for me is just, one, it just benefits all of humanity, right? And that's how we want to use, which has always been, the peaceful sanctity of space and utilizing that together, as you eloquently talked about, working with the Russians, right? We had people on both sides of the planet, waking up every day trying to think about how to defend or destroy each other. And then the common goal, common bond was being in space. And now we know we have other actors in space that, we may not have the luxury of having that type of bond together. So I think that's where, as Dylan says space is the place, and we just continue to see more and more folks gaining access to space. And I think that's where, maintaining that high ground and that moral high ground of utilizing space is something that we need to continue to focus on. And I think that's what Starlab's going to do with our international partners.
Oh, for sure. And Starlab is very special in that respect for several different reasons. One is we need, as a nation, and really as a space community of friendly nations, we need to maintain what we've done on the ISS and have a continuous human presence in space. You can't make the advancements, in my view, in science and commercialization and eventually manufacturing unless you have the continuity of the experiments you do on board. You cannot do that in short term. You have to have this time when you can develop and then build that experience base and then hit the knee in the curve, as we're starting to see with the ISS when it comes to things that can be commercialized. So that's super important. And what Starlab does is single launch to orbit space station where you can have continuous human presence with a crew of 4 all the time. And what that means is from the very beginning, instead of having to build in space like we did on STS-127, we brought up the Japanese exposed facility, you can really begin that same place on the ISS, but with new technology, new capabilities, and continue the progress that we've made to date. And the other aspect is precisely what Starlab has done, and that is, instead of a partnership with countries like the ISS, it's a partnership and a business relationship with the best-in-class companies within the countries. So both of those, I think, are very unique approaches that will allow us to continue the legacy of the ISS, but really take it to the next level.
Sure. I mean, just the concept of single launch to orbit with equal lab space that's currently on the ISS that took, years to come to fruition. I mean, we basically get to orbit and we're open for business day one.
We're open for business day one. You're exactly right. So it's about 2/3 of the volume of the U.S. portion of the ISS and all of the R&D capacity. And the reason it works out that way is that ISS, amazing engineering achievement and great advancements, but it really wasn't purpose-built. It wasn't taken with the approach of eventually we're going to have this ability to commercialize. It was lab space, but volume's important, and how you organize that and optimize it is something that you're able to do when you're starting from a clean sheet of paper, still taking the lessons from the ISS because we want to implement the best practices, the best capabilities, but also take it from the viewpoint that it's 2 roles. It's meeting exploration objectives of NASA and the other space agencies, but also taking advantage of this burgeoning commercial market.
Yeah. And, the fact is we've had the ability to be kind of the only game in town, but now there are other space stations that are owned by other nations' militaries, and they're manned by their military astronauts. It's a different model than what the ISS was born out of, a different ethos. So I think, to your point, to kind of lose this or not have the commercial end of it, to have this partnership with NASA would be just a travesty to have that 25, plus year legacy, lost. But I think we're going to do both. We're going to obviously stay in LEO, and then we're going to continue to do the amazing work. You mentioned Artemis and what we're doing to build a moon base. We've got capability, through our partnership with Max Space and others, that we are going to also have a strong presence as a company on the lunar surface.
Right. Well, one thing that really resonated with me from our new administrator, Isaacman, was we can't have a bunch of bespoke programs. You can't have a very unique LEO program, a very unique lunar program, and one for going to Mars and perhaps other missions as well. So having a tie between those is really important. And one of the advantages of having a commercial station is it really is the proving ground so that you can have reliable and the longevity of life support systems and other components. So it becomes a proving ground for the exact same or very similar capabilities that are required for the moon, for a human presence, and then eventually going to Mars.
Sure. Yeah. And, again, as we just witnessed with Artemis II, it's not a quick trip. I mean, you're committed, especially if you're on the lunar surface and you need to make it back to Earth. And, I don't think we want to just totally be void of LEO from a human perspective and allow other nations to have their capabilities that, like you mentioned before, going overhead our nation every 90 minutes. So
pretty amazing. When I watched the Artemis II launch, I didn't really get anxious at all until the translunar insertion, because frankly, this was a much safer vehicle than the space shuttle. The space shuttle had black zones, meaning if you had a failure during certain sequences, you didn't have any way to survive. Whereas, you've got the abort system. So that meant even if things go really badly on launch and for a large portion of the mission, you can still come home safely. But once you light those engines for the translunar insertion, like giddy up, you're en route. And now you're on your journey to the moon. So instead of 250 miles away, it's 250,000 miles away. So it's a big deal.
Absolutely. Well, what a testament to the engineering and the flight profiling and everything else. I mean, tremendous mission success. And we've now, like you mentioned, being 6 and seeing the Apollo program, our 6-year-olds now, we've got a new generation that is ready to take on the challenge. So I really appreciate you being here, Tim, sharing your stories. I know you give a lot of talks. Is there anything that you want to leave our audience with, especially maybe some of the younger folks that might be listening in on this one?
Yeah, maybe one thing. Being competent in math, science, and engineering, super important for anybody that wants to be in this combination of technical operational role, which I absolutely love, and then having leadership capabilities. But it really ties into playing well with others. I was on 2 astronaut selection committees, and by the time in fact, in 2013, it started out with 18,300 applicants. It went down to maybe 6,000 that had qualifications, 600 that got reference checks, 120 that got the first interview, 50 that got the second interview. And so there's about maybe 15 of us sitting around the table. Most of us were astronauts in this interview process. And I think the thing that was going through all of our heads was not necessarily the degrees they had or the specific applications of what they've done in the business world or the government world, wherever they came from, although that's certainly important. But what's really going through our head is, who do you want to go camping with? And what is that? It means that someone that just plays well with others. And camping is a great analogy because if you go on a camping trip, you got to take care of yourself. You got to roll up your sleeping bag, clean up your site, be on time, not slow other people down. You need to be a good follower. And a good follower is someone who intrinsically knows how to fit into the team because they have built the relationships with the others and they know how to help the team. And then be a good leader. And a good leader is someone who knows the synergies of the different people and can bring them together to accomplish the mission. And those are all things that you have touch points on when you go camping. And so being a good team player is super important. Human spaceflight, at the end of the day, is a team sport. It's a team sport between the companies that work with NASA. It's a team sport with mission control and the crew on board. Within the crew. So these interpersonal skills are absolutely important.
Well, Tim, totally inspirational. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'm proud to be your teammate here at Voyager.
Likewise, brother.
So thank you so much for everything. And thank you to our audience for tuning in to another episode of the Voyager Podcast.